everyone.
Hello.
Welcome. My name's Lois. I'm the innkeeper at the Baldpate Inn. I'm tripping over my own speech here tonight. Welcome. We're glad to have you here for our next to last, hate to say it, summer Enchanted evening, but it's going to be a really good one. Just a little propaganda. You may or may not have noticed on your information that we sent out this week. This is our last week for the restaurant. Again, you know, we lose a lot of staff in the fall going back to school, but we are going to do our to-go through the month of September. So if you're just dying for a cornbread fix, give us a call. Soup and cornbread or pie or Hector's lunch to go, we can do all that through September. So I'm going to put these little menus by the cookies, so on your way out, grab one if you're interested at all. Tonight, we have Danielle. Next week, we have Dave Thomas, so that'll be our finale. And both these presentations, I don't know, you could say we saved our best to last, but Danielle has been awesome. I think we need to give her a hand before we even start. She has been an awesome curator this summer, doing lots of good blogs and postings and keeping us all on track in the museum area, and so we truly appreciate that. And so we Godspeed with her as she goes back to a new job. You know, she just graduated, and she's going into a real job. If this was a pretend job, I'm not sure, but I think it was kind of probably more real than she wanted it to be at times. But anyways, thank you, Danielle, and we're going to turn it over to you and let it roll.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Baldpate. I'm Danielle, and as she said, I'm a curator here at the Keyroom. You may have seen me running around doing various other jobs, though, as it goes. So my name is Danielle. I'm actually going into my second year of my program in museum studies at the University of Washington. But before that, I studied anthropology, and anthropology, that discipline is very concerned with culture, and to me, storytelling is a really big part of culture, and that's what attracted me to this topic for today, to tell you some of the myths and legends and cool stories about this region that we all are in right now. So that's a little bit about me, and I have 5 stories to tell you today, but I want to preface this with I've only lived here about 3 months, so I think most of you probably know a little bit more about the lore around here. And so if there's ever anything where you want to ask me more about or you have a little correction, just quip in, you know, and that's completely fine. So we're going to start today with a story that I think some of you might know because it was pretty relevant in the last few months. It's the story of Forrest Fenn's buried treasure. Does that ring a bell to anybody? Yeah, so this one here is pretty cool. So Forrest Fenn, he's this fellow here. He was born in Temple, Texas in 1930, graduated in 1947 from high school, and we know him as this art dealer, author, and huge millionaire, right? He hid a portion of his earnings in a actual treasure chest somewhere in the Rocky Mountains. But I just wanted to tell a little bit more about his backstory before going into the whole treasure hunt. Before all of that, Forrest actually served in the military straight out of high school. He was a pilot in Vietnam for 20 years, and this is a photo of him on the left here as a pilot, and on the right, I think that was probably taken for like NBC or something like that when this whole treasure thing happened. So during his tour in Vietnam, he completed 328 missions in 365 days, so that's pretty incredible. And for that, he was awarded a Silver Star Medal for his service. And as some of you probably know, that's one of the highest awards given for military service. I think it's the 3rd highest. So after this 20 years long military career, Forrest actually decided to open up an art gallery, of all things, in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where he had relocated to with his wife. Here's a quote from him about his money-making career in the art business, and I find it really funny. It's going to tell a lot about his strategy when he was an art gallerist. So he says, "I never studied art, didn't own a painting, and didn't know anybody who did. It doesn't matter who you are, it only matters who they think you are. It's true in Hollywood, in politics, and it's true with the painting." So that's not really the type of attitude you would think like an art gallery owner would have. You know, they're usually they've studied art history for years and years, they've been to Paris, they've been to wherever, and they have such a respect for the stuff they're selling. And I'm not saying that he doesn't have a respect for it, but the appearance meant a lot to him. On the left here, you can see a newspaper clipping that's talking about the opening of his gallery. I think it was like in 1980 or something like that. It was called the Aerosmith Fenn Galleries, and they were in Santa Fe. This was actually a hugely successful business for him. He had a lot of really noteworthy clientele. He sold to Jackie Onassis, he sold to Robert Redford and Steven Spielberg, just to name a few. So he was kind of a celebrity art dealer, basically. And this is how he made his millions and millions of dollars, which is going to relate to the whole treasure aspect of the story. So a few years later, in 1988, Forrest was diagnosed with cancer and told there was a pretty slim chance he was going to recover, that it was probably going to be a terminal illness for him. And that kind of inspired him to try to do something bold and interesting while he still could. So he decided he was going to hide a portion of his wealth, as I mentioned, in gold, jewels, things like that, not just cash, actual jewels, in this ornate box and put it somewhere in the Rocky Mountains. And how he decided to get the word out about this, in 2010, he published this memoir called The Thrill of the Chase. And it's, you know, a full-length novel that talks about his life, his military service, his childhood. But really the main thing to talk about for this presentation is that it had clues to this treasure, most of which were in one particular poem in the novel, which I will read for you now. So this is the main set of clues that people followed when they were trying to find this treasure. All right, so the poem goes like this. "As I have gone alone in there, and with my treasures bold, I can keep my secret where, and hint of riches new and old. Begin it where warm waters halt, and take it in the canyon down. Not far, but too far to walk. Put in below the home of Brown. And there is no place for the meek. The end is ever drawing nigh. There'll be no paddle up your creek, just heavy loads and water high. If you've been wise and found the blaze, look quickly down, your quest to cease. But tarry scant with marvel gaze, just take the chest and go in peace. So why is it that I must go and leave my trove for all to seek? The answer is I already know. I've done it tired, now I'm weak. You hear me all and listen good. Your effort will be worth the cold. If you are brave and in the wood, I give you title to the gold." So that's the 6 stanzas that people just meticulously looked through when this memoir was published to try to find, you know, they would cross out certain letters in there and try to find hidden messages. They would think about certain areas in the Rocky Mountains and try to relate them to the things that are mentioned here. But as you heard, it's not the most specific poem. It kind of seems like it could be anywhere where there's a river and where there's you have to follow it, but not too far to walk. It's tough, right? So this prompted a somewhat nationwide search for this treasure among certain circles, among budding treasure hunters, basically. And this treasure was reported to be valued at over $2 million, so there's some reason to be searching for it. And over the years, as he published his memoir since 2010, he had given some clues through this online blog that he ran. He's a very avid blogger. There's a lot there. And some of the clues that he gave through that blog is that the treasure was going to be above 5,000 feet in elevation. It was in the Rocky Mountains, as you can see with this map here. This is a little clip of a page in the book. So it was going to be in the Rocky Mountains, over 5,000 feet in elevation. He said it's not in a graveyard, it's not in like a dangerous old mine, it's not near any structure. And he wanted to remind people that he hid this treasure as an 80-year-old person, so it wasn't anywhere really dangerous that you couldn't get to. So those are the hints that he gave along the way. And so as I said, the publishing of this book did prompt a pretty widespread search. Some people, wouldn't take it that seriously and might just go out with their kids just to, oh, remember the treasure, But some people were very, very serious about it. And this whole treasure hunt wasn't necessarily all fun and games like I think Forrest wanted it to be. Unfortunately, there was a lot of casualties associated with this treasure hunt. There have been 5 known deaths associated with, people searching for this treasure. The first person to pass away, it was in 2016, and this guy was searching somewhere in New Mexico in the Rockies. In 2017, 3 additional people passed away, 2 of them in Colorado. Colorado was a pretty popular destination to search for this treasure. It's not like Forrest said it was in Colorado, but people really thought it was going to be in Colorado. In 2020, that was the last casualty, and this guy had actually moved to Colorado to find this treasure. Like, it was a full-time thing for him, and it's, as we all know, it can be really dangerous out there if you don't know what you're doing, and this is part of why Forrest reminded people that it's not somewhere that you have to risk your life to find it. And in 2017, especially when those 3 casualties happened, authorities were telling Forrest, like, please end this treasure hunt because this is not fun anymore, and there's been deaths associated with it. But he thought that it could give people a fun thing to do on a weekend, or and like it could change someone's life if they found this treasure. So he decided to keep the hunt going. And when everything kind of seemed hopeless, the treasure was actually found. It was June 6th, 2020, which was not too long ago, was when the treasure was reported to be found. Basically, Forrest went on record saying that he had been notified by somebody who produced enough evidence to convince him that he had found it. He sent a photo of the treasure as it was laid in the grass, like the actual spot that it was. And so he announced that the treasure hunt was over, and that it had been found. And, I just want to emphasize that this was kind of like a huge subculture of people trying to search for these treasures. And I'm sure that there's other treasures in America that people hunt for, and this was a really big fish. So I was looking on some of those message boards that people have online where they're discussing the treasure that was found. And people were begging to know anything about where it was, because they all have their own solves to the riddle, and they just really wanted to know, like, where was I not looking for this? And Forrest, from the very beginning, he decided that it would be up to that person to decide if they wanted to reveal themselves in the media and tell where they found it and everything. And this guy apparently wanted to keep pretty anonymous and not tell too much about what happened. So all we know is that this is a man from the East Coast of the U.S., and that he found the treasure in Wyoming, which was not the #1 place people were looking mostly. It was mostly Colorado. And so I think a lot of the treasure hunter people kind of felt better about, like, oh, I wasn't even in the right area, I could have been right if I were there, type of thing. So that's how this story ends. And some people, for some reason, think that the treasure is still out there. I think maybe they just are holding on a little bit too much, but it does appear that the treasure was found. There actually, like maybe a week ago or something, I didn't have a chance to get it into the presentation, but I think Forrest actually met up with the man and inspected the chest. So there's some photos of him handling the jewels and things like that, and confirming, like, oh yeah, I remember this, and things like that. So that's this story, which I thought was a really cool opener, since I think a lot of us probably know about it. And the next one here, we have No, that's not a photo of the real treasure. I tried to not infringe on copyright in this presentation, which is pretty difficult, and there are copyrighted photos of the treasure. I just couldn't put them in here. Yeah, so our next legend, we have a couple Native American legends coming up. One is about the Angel of Shavano. So I might be saying it wrong. It might be. Do you guys know? I think it's. Okay. Yeah. So this angel here, as you can see circled, it's like a geographical feature on this mountain that kind of looks like an angel with outstretched hands. And so that's what we're going to be talking about, the legend of how that came to be. So there are three main legends associated with the angel, and a couple of them are pretty similar. I think you can tell that they're basically just been adapted from one another. They're pretty similar. And the last one is a little less common. So the first one we'll begin with, oh, sorry, I forgot. I just wanted to show you where the mountain was, and that's where we are, so it's not too far away. Right, so the first legend is about the goddess. So think Greek goddess. And this young goddess upset Hera somehow and was exiled and turned into this angel of ice atop the mountain. And the legend has it that she could only be free from that exile once something really tragic happened to the people below the mountain, the people who lived below in that settlement. So she had to be stuck on the mountain for years and years and years. And then finally, there was this severe drought and famine in the town below. And it made the goddess really feel for them and start to cry. And so her snow melted as she was crying. And, lo and behold, it ended the drought, the water from the mountain. And so as per her terms of exile, she was free because the tragedy had struck the settlement and things like that. But she chose to stay atop the mountain and melt away every spring to bring water to the people. So that's a nice little story here. And the next one, which is about an Indian princess, this is Sacagawea, I know, but there's not a lot of photos associated with these legends because they're myths. So I decided to just stick this up here. But this subsequent legend of the Indian princess bears a lot of similarities to the first one. And I just want to begin by just saying that not a lot of, the term Indian princess really isn't correct when you look at the way that the tribes run themselves, the way that they govern themselves and the structure of power. So when we talk about an Indian princess like, Pocahontas or Tiger Lily or something like that, it might be better referred to as just the daughter of a chief. And not every tribe even has a chief, but so that's what we can think of when we think about this. And this is another reason why I sort of think that this legend is pretty much just adapted from the first one, because I don't think Native American people would talk about an Indian princess because that's not something that existed for them. All right, so this one tells the story of a Native American settlement at the base of the mountain. And they had lived there for a very long time, hunting and fishing and just living their lives. And one year there was a terrible drought and famine, which sounds very familiar to the first one. And they feared that they would have to move to another region just to survive because the famine was so bad. And so the story goes that a young Indian princess ran to the base of the mountain and prayed to the spirits to beg for her people to survive this terrible drought. And the spirits did agree, but they required her to sacrifice herself in order for her people to survive. And so she then transformed into this angel of ice. And just like the first legend with the goddess, she appears every year in the snow and melts away and adds water to the rivers. And so that you can see the parallels between those. So I'm pretty sure that they're kind of, one and the same, basically. And then the last legend associated with this angel it tells the story of Chief Shavano. So, or Shavano. Sorry, I haven't been saying it right. It's hard to break that habit. Okay, well, I don't know. Yeah, so this is not a picture of this chief. It's a picture of one of the more notable Arapaho leaders named Little Raven, but I thought it would create a nice image for us. And I'm sure, as some of you already know, Colorado has historically and presently been inhabited by the Arapaho and Ute Native American people. So Chief Shavano is actually a Ute chief, and he was reigned during the 1870s. And so this legend says that the mountain was actually named after him, and this does bear some truth, because the name of the mountain appeared on maps starting like 1879, which was right after he was, during the decade of his reign. So this legend associated with the chief, it was said that a friend of his was severely injured, and the chief went to the base of the mountain once again to pray for this friend that he would survive the injuries. And this one's a pretty short legend. It's just as a sign that his prayers were heard, the angel appeared on the mountain, is how that one goes. So this is sort of the less popular of the three, probably because it's also the most different from the other two. And what I like about legends like this talking about the same thing is that you can kind of just think of the one that you like the best, because they're not, one's not true and the other's false or something like that. So I think that's a nice part about myths and legend is that you can kind of create your own with that. And our third legend here is another Native American legend, and it's the legend of the Sleeping Ute Mountain. So the Ute Nation has lived on these lands in Colorado for generations and generations, Colorado and Utah, modern day. And their name for this mountain, as you can see, it's over there in the corner of the map, and we're way up over here. Their name for this mountain, which I probably can't pronounce totally correctly, is Wisuvkaruv, and I just wanted to put that in there. The Ute Nation has 3 distinct tribes with reservations in both Colorado and Utah. Sleeping Ute Mountain is on the Ute Mountain Reservation, and then the other 2, there's the Northern Ute Reservation, which is in Utah, and then the Southern Ute Reservation, which is also in Colorado. There were originally 12 tribes in this nation, but and the names for those still exist, and I think those people still know their origins, but they were sort of grouped into these 3 reservations, which is how people refer to them today as well. So as you can kind of hear with just the word Ute, the state of Utah is named after these people. But the name Ute was actually, people think it was ascribed to the tribe by other tribes, which is kind of how I've been noticing a lot of the names that we use for certain Native American tribes are names that other tribes called them, not the name that they gave themselves. So the name that the Ute Nation gives themselves is over here, the one that starts with N. I think it's pronounced something like Nuchi. It's really hard to find pronunciation guides for things like this, so your guess is as good as mine. So now on to the legend. So Sleeping Ute Mountain, they call it Sleeping Ute Mountain, who knew why? Because it bears a really remarkable resemblance to a person lying on their back with their hands over their chest. As you can see, the head, this is why I wanted my pointer, because I wanted to just show you guys. So, there we go. Like the head here and the head here. We've got arms over the chest, and that's why it's raised. You can even see maybe like a knee right here and little toes. And I think it's really funny because people will refer to the parts of the mountain like this, like I'm just going to climb the toes today, which I think is really funny. So they call it this because of the resemblance that it bears to a person lying down. And the legend goes that in ancient times, there was this great Ute warrior who was battling with the evil ones. And it was just a years-long battle. It was, think like the Titans, you know, it's like a huge battle like that. And eventually the Ute warrior did defeat them, but laid down to rest because it was such an exhausting battle and he had a lot of injuries from it. And today the great Ute warrior still lies, and he will one day come to the aid of his people, is how the legend goes. So I think that's a really sweet legend, to make it seem, you know, like a person is actually in the nature, which is a really common theme in a lot of Native American legends. And so the Ute Mountain is still really important to the Ute Nation. They'll hold their annual Sundance ceremony atop the mountain, which happens every spring. I'm not sure if it was able to happen this year, like a lot of, you know, great festivals that we all like. I think it was probably canceled. But it's still a very sacred place for the Ute people today. And yeah, that's the little legend associated with this mountain range. And I was trying to find, you know, an image of someone laying down like this, and it was pretty hard to find one that matched up, but I finally did. It's probably to do with like arthritis or something. I don't know what this image is, but alrighty. And our next story here, which I think also some of you probably know more about than I do, is about Charles Eagle Plume. So has anybody heard of this man here? He was like a local Estes Park legend, is what I've come to understand. And you gotta know, I've only been here 3 months, so you know. So he was born in 1908, they say, and he claimed to have rode into Estes Park from a reservation on horseback. And whether or not this is true, he did become a permanent fixture of Estes Park life for many years. He was an entertainer, a lecturer on Native American history, and he came to own a shop that had a few names through its history. Now it's called Eagle Plumes. But I think he even worked here at the Baldpate Inn at some point, is what I found from my records as a young man, as like a teenager. So here we go with the stories about Charlie. So this is Eagle Plumes today. It's just down the street on Highway 7 in Allens Park. It's like 10 minutes away from here. And like the Baldpate Inn, it was also founded in 1917. The woman that founded it, her name was Catherine Lindsay, and she had moved to Colorado from Kansas. And the original name of this place was called the Whatnot Inn. There is also a Whatnot Inn in Kansas where she was from. And so Catherine had studied art in Paris, and she brought part of her father's art collection to her new store in Colorado. And a few years later, she married a Mr. Perkins, and the shop was renamed Perkins Trading Post, and that's the name that it's had for the longest. So here is a photo we have actually in our collection. It's in that room. It's in our library, and it's a picture of Charlie advertising his store. So Charlie, he became acquainted with Perkins Trading Post and Catherine and the family while he was a student at the University of Colorado Boulder. And so actually his tuition, I believe, was being paid for by just a wealthy tourist that had seen him perform and thought he should go to college. So that's really remarkable, I think. And so while he was a student, Charlie would help out every day at Perkins Trading Post. And as Mr. Perkins's health was declining, he started working full-time there after graduating, and he continued to give his lectures and performances at the Trading Post. And so he was also a big advocate for indigenous civil rights, sort of before that wave happened in mainstream culture. And eventually, Charles came to inherit the store himself as the owner. And so, you know, in his own right, for those that knew him, from what I gather, Charlie Eagle Plume was a legendary figure, so to speak, in his own right. But there is one particular story associated with him that I think is pretty captivating, and it's very mythical and cool. So it's told by the current owner of the store. The current owner, her name is Anne, and her husband own it. I believe that Anne was either his legally adopted or sort of metaphorically adopted daughter. So that's who the store ended up going to. So the legend is of the clock. And this is a photo of an old clock that hung at Eagle Plumes. And it was given to Catherine, the original owner, in 1881. And the clock hung behind Charlie's desk. And the tradition was that every Sunday they would wind the clock. And whenever the employees would arrive on a Sunday, Charlie would always, you know, kind of like announce and ask, like, has anybody wound the clock yet? Just kind of like a force of habit thing. Every Sunday he would ask. And one of the employees would say, you know, yes, sir, and he would go wind the clock, or he'd say, of course, and, you know, already it was wound. So, and remember, this story is told by Anne, the current owner. And at one point, Anne got pretty curious as to why Charlie was so keen on having this clock wound every Sunday, very particular about it. And with all seriousness, when he was asked that, Charlie said that because when this clock stops, he would die, is what he said. And Anne said, you know, she's known him for many years, and so she knew he was serious about this, and just made sure that clock was running, and every Sunday wound that clock, okay? And so as the years passed, Charlie became more ill and had to move into a nursing home instead of living with the family. But he did commute to work every day, like actually 7 days a week, 9 to 5 to work at the store. And so eventually, Charlie did pass away at 6:20 p.m. on September 8th, 1992. And on that day, everybody at the shop had gone out for dinner together at around like 6 o'clock or 5:30. And when they returned, they found that the clock had stopped. And lo and behold, the time it had stopped was 6:20 that day. So that's kind of the spooky, chilling myth associated with Charlie here. So that's his legend of the clock.
Danielle, I could just add something to that.
Yeah.
We still have a toast to the ghost.
Oh, really?
On September 8th.
Really?
If you go to Eagle Plumes, they will give you champagne and
Aw,
say,
that's
"Pray
sweet.
for Charlie."
That's really sweet. Yeah, see, I didn't know that. I knew somebody would have something pretty cool to add. So,
At 6:20.
yep, at 6:20. Yeah.
Charlie is the only person that the Baldpate Inn allowed to smoke in the building.
Really?
He was alive when we were here, and he was in a wheelchair, and he was very handicapped at that point. But he refused to come in our handicap ramp, and he literally crawled up the front step, and his people that were helping him helped him back in his wheelchair, and he would come to lunch quite often. He loved the chocolate pie, as many of you do. And he did always ask his server to stick their finger in his pie so that it would be just a little sweeter.
That's so sweet.
And most children in the area remember that Charlie, if he visited the store, always handed you an eagle feather. And yeah, Carol still has hers. So so he was quite the legend. He did actually work at the Baldpate Inn. And Sybil, maybe you know more about this. I'm not sure exactly what all he did, whether he just entertained or.
No, I think David Steiner has said that, you know, he worked like as a bellman or a waiter during the summers. The other thing about Charlie is the work is all in the summertime. You know, Estes Park was never a year round.
What was his performance? What did he perform? He sang or danced? Or
Dancing, Indian dancing and legends.
Oh.
So he performed everywhere in the valley. You know, that used to be like, one day was square dancing, one day was Charlie. Some other place it was Charlie, then it was square dancing. You could just travel around and do that kind of stuff. And talks like Danielle.
Yeah, man after my own heart. That's very sweet. So I think I might be flying through the presentation a little bit, but we are at my last story here. The last one, it's about Colorado's last grizzly bear. And so this one is not strictly a myth or a legend like the others, but it is sort of a wishy-washy topic, let's say, that I'm going to get into now. So before we talk about grizzly bears, I just want to talk a little bit about black bears, which we're all pretty familiar with, pretty common here in Colorado. So common, in fact, that you can see here, this photo on the right that I've put here is a photo of when a few black bears actually broke into this very room. It was a few years ago, and I think it was 3 black bears, but you can only see 2 in this image here. And one night they somehow opened that back door there and just got in, and they didn't do any damage at all. There's a video of the security footage on our YouTube page, which is where I grabbed this image from. It's a really funny little video, and they're all, they just kind of like sniffed around and looked around the key room like I would do, like they were just checking out the key room. So we're all very familiar with black bears here. I just want to tell a little story about the first and only time I've seen a black bear, which happened here around Lily Lake. So I got here early June just to start my job here. And when you arrive your first day at the Baldpate, you're not expected to work that first day because you don't know anything yet, and you just got here from a long drive or a long flight. So it was my first day here, and I thought, I'm going to walk over to Lily Lake and just look around. I'm from Los Angeles, and it's much more of a suburban environment that I'm used to. The only wildlife we have are little pigeons and squirrels and stuff, and you really just have to watch out for the double wide strollers. That's what could get you if you're walking down the street. You got to just get out of the way for that. So I'm not used to a lot of wildlife, and that's one of the main reasons why I thought that this would be such a cool experience for the summer, was because I wanted to, soak in the nature and things like that. So I walk over to Lily Lake, and I brought my earbuds like I'm kind of used to doing if I want to go for a pensive walk, pop in some music, and very common in a suburban neighborhood to see somebody with earbuds in. So I'm walking around the lake, and I have my earbuds in, and I feel great, and the lake's only like a 20-minute walk at most, so I wasn't really, ready for my walk to be over yet. So I decided to just take one of the little trails off the lake. There's Lily Ridge, which goes up a little bit, and then there's also, I think, Storm Pass Trail as well. So I turn onto Storm Pass Trail, walking around, and I see like some felled trees that have been put into like a teepee little thing off that trail. And so I see it, and I'm like, oh, cool, I want to go, check that out over there. So I decide I'm going to take out my earbuds now because maybe someone's camping in there. Maybe I'm going to like sneak up on someone. So I take out my earbuds, and like the moment I take out my earbuds, I see like the figure, the side profile of a bear. Okay, and it's not that far away. It's pretty close, and maybe like 100 feet away, and it had just stepped out from behind a tree, basically. And I think if I had had my earbuds in, I might not have noticed, you're just not as aware. So the minute I took it out and I see this bear, and I'm just thinking, okay, and I remained calm, I didn't linger at all. My first thought was like, should I take a photo? No, like immediately I was like, no. That's, famous last words if you're gonna take a photo. So I just kind of backed up, and I went back down, Lily Lake. So that's the only time I've seen a black bear, but it was here in Colorado too. So a little bit about black bears. Their Latin name is Ursus americanus. They range in size from about 90 to 550 pounds. The female bears are usually smaller. And appearance-wise, a lot of them are black, as we've seen, but they come in a lot of different colorways. They can be brown, they can be like a cinnamon blonde color, or like a white gray color as well. And it's estimated that there's about 12,000 bears in the state of Colorado. There's also a lot in California, but I was just not in the right places to see them at home. So now we can talk about the grizzly bear. So grizzly bears, I just want to point out their Latin name here. It's Ursus arctos horribilis, okay? And I kid you not, they were given this Latin name because the naturalist who first classified grizzly bears, his name was George Ord. He just thought they were horrible in character. He thought they were scary and horrible, and so he decided to name them Ursus arctos horribilis, and I find that just hilarious. And even still, the informal name grizzly bear that we use, it actually dates back to the Lewis and Clark expeditions, and they were the first people to describe this bear as grizzly. It's not spelled exactly like this. It's like Grisley, I believe. And so people think one of two things as to why they decided to call the bear grizzly. One could be that it appeared grizzled, like it had light tips to the hair or gray tips to the hair, or it's that it was grisly, like fearsome and scary. And because of the name of the bear, Ursus arctos horribilis, I kind of think that second one is right, that Lewis and Clark were just thinking this is a really scary animal, and so they called it grizzly. So that's a little bit about the namesake of the grizzly bear. Size-wise, the smallest, it's about 290, and it can get up to about 800 pounds. So they're a lot bigger than black bears. There is still some overlap in there, like 300 to 500 pounds-ish. Both bears can be that size. But appearance-wise, they do have some differences. Grizzly bears are usually brown, and the main thing that will separate them from when you see a black bear is that they have this big hump here on their shoulder, whereas black bears are a lot more streamlined. And I believe, the snout, there's some differences too. I think grizzly bears have more of a wide face than black bears do, but because black bears come in a lot of different colors, I can see where people would mistaken one for the other, especially if they see them from a distance or something like that. And then numbers-wise, officially, I suppose there are none in Colorado, but I just wanted to add this little note. We think there are none in Colorado, and this is where sort of the myths come in, all right? So I just want to talk about some of the most recent grizzly bear sightings in the last 50 or so years. So in 1952, it was reported that a hunter killed what was supposed to be the last grizzly bear in Colorado, and it made headlines and stuff like that. And in the 50s, people thought that grizzly bears were extinct, if not almost extinct. And then, lo and behold, more than 20 years later, there's this highly publicized incident with a man named Ed Wiseman and Colorado's last known grizzly bear. And so I'm going to tell that story now because it's pretty incredible. So Ed Wiseman, he's an elk hunter, and it's the last day of elk hunting season. He uses bows and arrows, and he was hired out by a few people to be their guide as they were hunting. And it's evening, like 5 or 6 p.m., and him and his party were in like a little gorge, like a little valley, kind of a small, relatively small enclosed area. And just out of nowhere, like a 400-pound female grizzly bear appears and just starts charging this guy, Ed. And I've never had a bear run at me, but I can probably assume that that would be absolutely terrifying. So Ed, the first thing he does is he kind of tries to shout and scare the bear away. I think we're all kind of taught to do that when you read guides and things like that, that you're supposed to make a lot of noise. So he tries to shout, the bear's still running, and he tries to load his bow and arrow to shoot, but it was just too late, and the bear knocked the bow and arrow out of his hands and pounced on him, so he's on his back. So this 400-pound, female grizzly is on this guy Ed, and at first he thinks, okay, I'm gonna play dead. And I don't know how many seconds, probably not minutes, I think he would have probably passed away if it were minutes. I don't know how many seconds he tried to go along with this strategy, but he soon realized that playing dead was not gonna work. The bear was, biting him and shaking him like they tend to do with their jaws. And so kind of just in desperation, he managed to spot one of his arrows on the ground, to the side. And so he grabs the arrow by the hand and it just starts laying in hits up, okay? And when he tells this story, I've seen a couple interviews of him telling it, and he kind of just is incredulous at this point when he tells it. He's like, I don't know how it happened, but this is what happened. So, he got 2 stabs in, and he said that one hit the jugular vein and one hit right above the heart. And so two hits, and the bear got up and stumbled away a few yards away and just collapsed and didn't get up again. So incredibly lucky encounter here with the grizzly bear. And this is actually a photo that he took of the bear. So that's really what happened. And the story doesn't end there. He has just had this terrible attack, and it's let's say 7 p.m. at night. And he's not rescued until 7 a.m. the next day. So he's sitting there for 12 hours with these terrible injuries. I think it was just something about they couldn't find his location, and it's difficult to do these rescues. So he's finally rescued, and he spends a month recovering in the hospital from his injuries. And a couple days in to his hospital stay, he's informed that he is under federal investigation for killing an endangered species, okay? Which I know we find pretty funny, but he was under investigation for this killing because authorities didn't really believe him that this is what happened. He was a hunter, and it's pretty incredible that somebody could survive an attack like this with just a handheld object. So I think that's part of why they had the suspicion. And up until, in the 50s, people thought that grizzly bears were extinct. So it was a big deal that one had turned up in 79. And at this point, a lot of articles were being published, and there was some news coverage, and even the public thought he was lying about this for a time. Like, he kind of had a really bad reputation because he had killed this grizzly bear. And eventually he did get his name cleared, and people came to believe his story. I think they, experts had done tests and ballistics and stuff like that to confirm that this is what happened. I believe they have this grizzly corpse on display in a museum somewhere, so they had the evidence to examine. So that's the story of the last known grizzly bear in Colorado. And it's sort of every year since then, there's reports every year of grizzly bear sightings in Colorado. The National Park Service has to deal with those. There's a form online called grizzly bear sightings that you can submit. So it's a common thing. And I found one in particular in 2006. Some people spotted a grizzly bear and 2 cubs near Aspen, but there has never been any substantiated grizzly bear sightings since this one in 1979. And so the question is, are there grizzly bears in Colorado? Probably not. I mean, there was a span of 20 years where people thought there were none, and then one turned up, but we're not sure if that, if that could really happen again. I suppose it is feasible that a small group of grizzly bears could be living undetected somewhere, but we're not so sure about that. That's sort of the mystical part of this. And now we can ask the question, will grizzlies ever return to Colorado? And to that, I say maybe. I say they maybe can, and here's why. So natural migration of species happens all the time, and it's especially been happening more and more in these last 10 years due to just changing habitats and climates. And so if you know, if you can't hunt and live the way that you're used to, then I can, you know, it's clear to see how species will change their habitats. That might not really, just thinking about cooling and heating patterns, grizzly bears are more common in Canada than in the US. I believe there's maybe only like one state that has grizzly bears in the US. So we're not sure, you know, natural migration does happen that way. And then finally, another interesting little tidbit here is that the Center for Biological Diversity has actually filed a lawsuit asking the Fish and Wildlife Service to look into reintroducing grizzly bears to Colorado. So they've actually put this formal request out, basically. I'm not saying it's going to happen next year or tomorrow or in 5 years, but that is sort of on the horizon, maybe. And I think the Center for Biological Diversity, as you can tell in their name, they want to restore habitats that species have occupied in years past. Yeah, so that's the legend of Colorado's last grizzly. And that's my last one that I have today for you all. I just want to thank you all for listening to me today. If there are any questions or any other fun stories people want to tell, then absolutely can give you that time.
Well, no, there are a couple of grizzly stories about Estes Park.
Really?
The first one, of course, being Rocky Mountain Jim, who was Isabella Bird's guide of Long's Peak, and he only had half his face because he had an encounter. He was out somewhere and a dog scared up a grizzly bear and brought it back, and he survived that somehow in the late 1800s.
Yeah.
And then Enos Mills, who was here until about 1922, found a grizzly bear and adopted, and it was dead. It died of some kind of natural causes, maybe a snow slide or something. So it left 2 cubs, which he raised and kept at the Enos Mills cabin for a couple years, and then he donated them to the Denver Zoo. And there was a whole habitat built for these 2 grizzly bear cubs. And this is before my time, not quite that old, but they were there for quite a while. And it's the basis of the bear exhibit in the Denver Zoo.
Cool.
But it's great presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming.
Where's LA?
Pasadena.
We spent a year out there, ending last year, we were there for, we're down the beach area. We loved it. Yeah, did you bring the flyers in here or what?
I know, it's like I leave here, to go there.
Yeah, we did that too. We were flyers there when we were there. Now we're here.
I like to sit in the corner. Yes, it is.
I was thinking you were gonna come up and sit. You know, there's ghosts in there.
Keeping Zoe alive.
Yeah. I did people just
Oh, yeah, they did. Yeah, we had about 40, over 40.